Hey guys, June here, and we're back with episode 17 in Collecting Collections, and it's been a bit of a lean week in RuneScape for me. This is partly because I've been cutting back on my playtime at home while my girlfriend's visiting, but we also have a new client at work who's much higher needs than our other clients, and kind of prevents me from doing any kind of PVM, so I've been spending most of the week working on other kinds of achievement-based goals and clue scrolls. This past weekend stream was also a bit more chill than usual, where all I really wanted to do was get some viewers into the Discord and play games with you guys online, and although we did have tons of fun, that doesn't really make for any kind of stream highlights. This coming weekend stream should be a whole lot more fun, as our goal on stream is going to be to get everyone possible the Reaper title, both by hosting short boss masses for anything that we can do in large groups, as well as hosting several raids where we're going to be dragging learners through, as well as some Rise of the Six kills. The biggest limitation on how many people we can get the title is going to be how many raids we can do, and so we've already set up a queue for both raids and Rise of the Six in the Discord, so if you're interested in joining us for this, I recommend hopping in there and getting yourself signed up as soon as possible to make sure that you're towards the top of the list. We'll also probably end up needing some semi-skilled people to fill in for roles at things like raids and Virago, and even if you really don't need anything from this stream, ultimately it's just a bunch of boss masses, so it should be tons of fun anyway. As for the actual core of this video though, I want to talk about something that's been bothering me for the past few years actually, and has recently come up under discussion again for the 9,001st time. This seemed like a reasonably appropriate place to rant about it, since this whole entire video series really focuses around my completionist related goals, and of course the topic under discussion is the Completionist Cape, the Trimmed Completionist Cape, and their associated requirements, with a particular emphasis on the Castle Wars requirement. First though, I think it's worth explaining why this is important to me. I've been a completionist style gamer since the very beginning. I got my very first real game when I was about 6 years old, and that was Final Fantasy VII, and I was the kind of kid that not only enjoyed playing through the main quest, but got tons of enjoyment out of the side quests like chocobo racing. Beyond that, I would even go so far as to spend hours and hours grinding things like movers and magic pots in the Northern Cave to max out my character's levels and materia. Even beyond that, I would spend hundreds of hours grinding source items, as a means of forcing all of the character's stats up to their absolute maximums. This trend followed me everywhere, into open-world RPGs like The Elder Scrolls, where I got all of my enjoyment from collecting rare pieces of lore, legendary items, and maxing out my character's stats in every way possible. Clearly this held true for RuneScape as well, as even before either of the Completionist Capes existed, I spent a huge amount of my time working on strange little completable tasks like the Champion Scrolls. Even as we speak, the whole focus of this video series is on completing everything possible in-game, and so this trend clearly lives on strong. As such, I was super excited when the first round of dev blogs came out about the Capes of Distinction, one of which at the time referred to as the Uber Cape, which later evolved into the Completionist and Trimmed Completionist Capes, was super appealing to me. The description for this cape was as follows. This cape is for the completionists out there who feel they really have done everything. Of course, a cape like this has to be earned and maintained, because a player who wants to continue wearing this cape will have to keep completing all content, which will continue to grow and grow. The later decision to separate this into two capes was also quite reasonable. The base level completionist cape really only requires you to complete the things that have a direct reward for the player. Having the Trimmed Completionist Cape simply be a cosmetic upgrade from that base level made sure that Jagex had the freedom to give it all of the requirements that were appropriate for the true completionists out there without forcing players to feel like they're obligated to get this cape for best in slot stats or whatever. Even from the initial release, there were some requirements that obviously should have been on the Trimmed Completionist Cape that were missing. As an example, one of the many requirements was collecting all of the lore books from the Ancient Caverns, but for whatever reason, Jagex decided not to include collecting all of the lore books from Dungeoneering, which logically should be included as well. This subsequently led to the emergence of a small community of completionists who pursued what they called True Trim, which is essentially the collection of all of the actual trim requirements plus everything that logically should have been included based on the principles outlined in defining the cape itself. Although Jagex never actually went back and retroactively made these things requirements, they did a reasonably good job moving forward of maintaining the requirements for the cape. Any new piece of content that was released that had something that obviously fit on these capes was included, at least for the first several months. That was at least up until the very first time that complaints were raised about the existence of the 5,000 Castle Wars games requirement. Initially, these complaints were framed in the sense that they were ruining Castle Wars because players who were going for the 5,000 games weren't actually playing Castle Wars, but were simply AFKing them to get their game count and make progress towards trim. The real reason, as should be obvious from the fact that Castle Wars has become completely dead since the nerfing of these requirements, is that people felt like they were entitled to be able to get trim, and the Castle Wars requirement took disproportionately longer than most of the others. Despite the fact that all of this feedback really just amounted to people complaining about how it was too time-consuming to get this cosmetic upgrade, Jagex decided to move forward with reducing the requirement from what was logically the correct requirement from the perspective of actual completionism to something that they felt encouraged people to actually play the game while I was still in the active pursuit of trim for myself. I was the 181st person to unlock the trimmed Completionist Cape on April 9th of 2013. As a fun little bit of history, this made me the last player to get the trimmed Completionist Cape before the very first Castle Wars requirement nerf. This put me right in the sweet spot of how long it took to complete this requirement, after the era where people were able to boost Castle Wars games for 10 or 15 an hour, but before any of the nerfs. This one requirement has been nerfed a total of 3 times, and yet still there is no end to the amount of complaining that I see on Reddit and other forms of social media about its existence. At this point, the community's sense of entitlement to these capes has become so profound that Jagex is actually considering redefining what it means to actually own and obtain these capes. This year's annual RuneScape survey contains an entire section on completionism, with a special focus on figuring out what kind of requirements players didn't like. The direction this all seems to be going is to reduce or remove the requirements that players dislike from both capes, so that the people who don't actually want to complete all the things can still have their completionist capes. From the perspective of having the best in-slot cape being locked behind all of these high-level requirements, I completely agree that there should be an alternative cape that players who maybe don't want to actually do all the quests but still do endgame bossing should have access to. My complaints center around the trimmed Completionist Cape, which for all intents and purposes is like the Gold Warden title for completionism. Having the requirements reduced or removed because players complained about the difficulty or how time-consuming they were on Reddit seems to me to be just like complaining about how difficult 4000 Enraged Telos is and reducing the requirements on the Gold Warden title. Speaking as a player who will probably never get the Gold Warden title due to lack of skill, I would never ever support the childish reduction in that kind of a requirement simply to cater to people like me who aren't capable of doing it. My hope would be that if Jagex is intent on redefining these capes, they may reduce the requirements on the base level completionist cape to give more players access to the best in-slot cape without feeling obligated to complete the requirements, but given that trim is only a cosmetic, please don't go the direction of reducing the requirements on trim. If anything, include more of the things that you've missed from the very beginning. Revitalize trim to what it always should have been, the absolute endgame goal for completionist type players. In the early days of me obtaining the trimmed Completionist Cape myself, there was a huge amount of prestige attached. Everyone's first thoughts when they saw a trimmed Completionist Cape was, wow, that guy plays way too much, I bet he has never gone outside. Nowadays there are over 2,000 trimmed Completionist Capes, arguably more trimmed Completionist Capes than untrimmed Completionist Capes, and that's due to a mix of the fact that they keep nerfing the most difficult requirements in terms of time consumption, the fact that they've never gone back and retroactively added the requirements that should have been there from the beginning, and the fact that they have stopped maintaining the cape, so new updates recently which have things that obviously should be required for the trimmed Completionist Cape haven't actually been added as requirements. If this was done, there would no doubt be a lot of disgruntled players, so if necessary you could even go the route of making a third tier of cape above the trim. You could even call it the Uber Cape as a nice little throwback. Based on the current list of requirements, there probably wouldn't be anybody who could actually obtain the cape yet, but there would be a handful of players, including myself, who are reasonably close. This could give completionist gamers like myself back their sense of prestige, in the same sense that you see a person with the Gold Warden title and think, wow, that guy must be an absolute master at PvM, you should be able to look upon either the trimmed Completionist Cape or this arbitrary third new tier of cape and say, wow, that guy is a master completionist. Unfortunately, it looks like they're going the other direction in making it easier, and so I guess we'll all have to default back to our community-defined goal of true trim. I hope you guys will stick around in this video series with me as I pursue it myself, and as always, a big special thanks to Wumpery and Haunted Pro for their support on Patreon that helps me continue making these videos. Thank you guys as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.